The rain poured hard on the alien city, turning the streets into rivers of dirty water. Neon lights flickered above the market stalls, glowing through the mist. Merchants packed their goods quickly, pulling covers over their tables as the wind howled. Everyone was in a hurry to go home, to escape the cold night, but in the shadow between two broken buildings, a figure sat still. She was small, wrapped in a piece of torn cloth that barely covered her shoulders. Her clothes were wet, her skin pale, and her head hung low. The water dripped from her hair in steady streams. One leg was bent awkwardly against her chest. The other was gone, replaced by an empty space beneath the cloth. People passed by without stopping. Some looked at her, but most turned their heads away. Their eyes said she didn't matter, that she was just part of the street like the puddles and trash. She had no home, no leg, and from the way she sat without moving, maybe no hope either. A human man walked through the market, his boots splashing in the puddles. His coat was soaked, but he didn't seem to care. He had been buying supplies for the small workshop he ran, and a bag hung heavy from his shoulder. The sounds of the crowd faded as he spotted her. Something about the way she sat, so still, so quiet, made him stop. The man stood in the rain for a moment, watching her. She did not notice him, or if she did, she didn't care. Her head stayed down. The cloth around her shoulders shifted, slightly in the wind, revealing thin arms and skin marked with scars. The missing leg made his chest tighten. He could see how cold she was. He stepped closer, his boots sinking into the wet ground. She finally lifted her head, and for the first time he saw her eyes. They were large and bright, glowing faintly like two small lanterns. They were alien eyes, shaped differently from a human's, with thin golden lines running through them. But they were tired, empty, and full of something he couldn't name. She didn't speak. She didn't beg. She didn't stretch out a hand for food. She only stared at him, like she was waiting to see what he would do. Behind him, two alien merchants muttered to each other, their voices sharp. "Don't go near her," one said. "She's cursed." "She's an outcast," the other added. "No one takes her in." The man ignored them. He crouched in front of her, lowering himself so their eyes were level. Rain ran down his face, dripping from his hair. "You're freezing," he said quietly. "You shouldn't be out here." She blinked slowly, as if the words were strange. To her, her gaze dropped to his bag, then back to his face. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick piece of cloth, the scarf he had been wearing all day. It was still warm from his body. He held it out to her. She looked at it but didn't move. Her hands were hidden under the torn cloth she wore, and he noticed how they trembled. She seemed afraid to take anything from him, as if accepting it would cost her more than she could pay. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice calm. The rain pounded harder, splashing in the puddles around them. Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she was trying to decide if he was lying. Then she pulled her own ragged cloth tighter around her shoulders and turned her head away. He didn't leave, stayed crouched, the scarf still in his hand. "You're going to get sick if you stay here," he said. "Come with me. Have a fire and food." She didn't answer, but the way her fingers dug into the ground told him she had heard every word. A group of alien children ran past, their laughter sharp in the cold air. One of them glanced at her and smirked, whispering something to the others. They laughed harder. She kept her head down, her jaw tight. The man felt anger rise in him. He didn't know her, didn't know what had happened to her, but he knew no one deserved to be left like this. He lowered his voice even more. "I'm not asking you to trust me forever," he said. "Just for tonight. Just so you can be warm." This time she looked at him again. The rain caught in her glowing eyes, making them shine even brighter. For a moment, it was like she wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The man stayed where he was, not rushing her. The market around them grew quieter as more stalls closed. The smell of wet dust and metal filled the air. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Finally she moved. Slowly she reached out from under her cloth and took the scarf from his hand. Her fingers were ice cold. She held it for a second, then wrapped it loosely around her neck. She didn't smile. She didn't thank him. She didn't look away either. The man stood and offered her his hand. She stared at it, her expression unreadable. Then, with hesitation, she lifted her thin arm and placed her hand in his. It was a small hand, but the grip was strong for someone so frail. He pulled her gently to her feet, and for the first time, she leaned against him for balance. Her body was light, almost too light, and he could feel the way she struggled to stand on one leg. They stood there in the rain, surrounded by the sound of water hitting the ground. Neither of them spoke, but something had changed, and the man knew he wasn't going to walk away. The walk from the market was slow. The human kept his pace steady, matching her uneven steps. Every few moments she stumbled, and he adjusted his hold so she wouldn't fall. Her head stayed down, rainwater still dripping from her hair. Though the scarf now caught most of it, she didn't ask where they were going, didn't ask who he was. She didn't ask for food or water or shelter. Her silence was heavy, yet it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of someone who had stopped expecting anything from the world. When they turned into a narrow alley lit by a single, buzzing lamp, he glanced at her. She was watching the shadows on the ground instead of the street ahead. Her glowing eyes caught the faint light and reflected it like two pieces of polished gold. "Does your leg hurt?" he asked. She didn't answer. Only her shoulders rose, slightly, like she was holding something inside, at the end of the alley. The smell of baked bread drifted from a nearby shop. She slowed, her head tilting toward it for just a moment before looking away again. He noticed the way her lips pressed together as if she didn't want to admit she was hungry. The human led her into a quieter street. The buildings here were older, their walls stained by years of wind and rain. A few windows glowed faintly with warm light, but most were dark. The air was calmer here, away from the shouting and movement of the market. "You're safe," he said, his voice low. She turned her head slightly, her eyes scanning his face like she was searching for proof. Then she looked away again. They passed a group of aliens sitting on the steps of a rundown building. Their eyes followed her, some filled with pity, others with something colder. One of them muttered, "Why bother? She won't last the winter." Human kept walking. He felt her grip on his coat tighten just slightly, almost too light to notice. But it told him enough. She had heard the words, and they had cut deep. When they reached the edge of the street, the rain slowed to a light drizzle. The human stopped under an old iron awning, shaking the water from his coat. She stood beside him, still not speaking. Finally he asked, "What's your name?" Her head lowered again, and for a long moment he thought she would ignore him. Then, in a voice so quiet it was almost lost to the sound of the rain, she said Lyra, was the first word she had spoken to him. He repeated it softly. "Lyra, I'm Kale." She didn't reply, but he thought he saw her shoulders relax just a little. A gust of wind swept through the alley, making her shiver. Without thinking, Kale adjusted the scarf around her neck so it covered more of her chest. She didn't pull away. They started walking again, this time toward a small two-story building at the end of the lane. Its windows glowed warmly, and faint smoke curled from a chimney. The sight made the drizzle seem less cold. As they approached the door, Lyra paused. Her eyes lifted to the building, then to Kale. There was a flicker of hesitation, not because she didn't want warmth, but because stepping inside meant accepting kindness she didn't believe she deserved. Kale noticed, but he didn't push her. He simply stepped forward, unlocked the door, and held it open. The golden light from inside spilled into the street, casting a glow over her pale, rain-soaked face. She stood there for a heartbeat, her eyes fixed on the light, her thin fingers twitching against the edge of her ragged cloth. Then she stepped forward, crossing the threshold into a place she had never been invited before. For the first time since he had found her, Kale saw something new in her eyes. Not hope, not yet, but a question, and questions, he knew, meant she hadn't given up completely. The warmth of the room wrapped around Lyra like a blanket, yet she did not step further than the doorway. She stood there, dripping water onto the wooden floor, her bare foot leaving faint marks in the light. The smell of burning wood from the fireplace mixed with the soft scent of herbs hanging from the ceiling Kale set his bag down on a table and turned to her. "You can come in," he said, his tone calm, almost careful. She hesitated, eyes sweeping across the space, the shelves lined with tools and books, the small table set for one, the chair pulled close to the fire. It was not a palace, but it was clean, cared for, alive. Her gaze landed on the fire. The flames danced in the stone hearth, sending shadows flickering across the walls. She had seen fires before, but from a distance never this close, never with the heat reaching her skin. She took a single step, then stopped again, as if afraid she might break something just by existing here. Kale noticed the way her shoulders stayed tight, like she expected to be thrown back outside. He pulled a second chair closer to the fire. "Sit," he said gently. "You're cold." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in suspicion, the kind born from too many bad memories. Still, after a moment, she moved forward. Her steps were slow, her weight leaning heavily on her good leg. She lowered herself into the chair with the carefulness of someone entering an unfamiliar world. Kale knelt beside the fire, feeding it. "Another piece of wood?" The crackle filled the quiet, and for a while neither of them spoke. He let the silence stay, knowing she might need it. From the corner of his eye, saw her glancing at the bag he had brought from the market. Hunger was in the way her throat moved, in the way her fingers tightened against her knees. Yet she did not ask. He reached into the bag and pulled out a small loaf of bread. When he placed it on the table between them, her eyes followed it, but her hands stayed still. "It's for you," he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing the cost of accepting it. Finally, she reached out, her fingers brushing the warm crust. She tore off a small piece and ate slowly, like she was afraid it would vanish if she finished too quickly. As she ate, Kale studied her face in the firelight. The rain had washed away the dirt, revealing faint markings along her skin, natural, delicate patterns unique to her species. Her eyes seemed brighter now, though they still carried the weight of years spent alone. When she finished, she leaned back in the chair, holding the last piece of bread in her lap. "Why?" she asked quietly. Kale met her gaze, because no one else did. She looked away, her jaw tightening. That answer seemed too simple for her to believe, yet she didn't challenge it. For something in its shifting light, outside the wind rattled against the window, but inside the warmth held. Kale stood and fetched a folded blanket from a shelf, placing it over her shoulders. She didn't move to stop him. For a moment it was as if time slowed, the sound of the fire, the weight of the blanket, the light touching her face. And in that quiet Lyra realized something she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't outside anymore, looking in through the glass. She was inside, where someone had opened the door for her and kept it open. Asterisk, the fire's glow painted the room in soft gold. But Lyra's eyes still darted toward the door as if it might close on her at any second. The blanket around her shoulders was warm, yet she sat stiff, her hands hidden beneath the folds of fabric. Kale moved about the small kitchen, his steps steady, his back turned to her so she could breathe without feeling watched. He opened a pot, and the rich scent of stew filled the air, making her stomach tighten. She glanced toward him, then quickly away, fighting the instinct to ask for more food. When he returned, he carried a steaming bowl. He placed it gently on the table in front of her, and stepped back, giving her space. The smell was almost overwhelming. Tender pieces of root vegetables, spices that warmed the air, broth rich and full. She looked at the bowl, then at him. "For me?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "For you," he replied. This time she didn't wait as long. She reached out, wrapping her thin fingers around the spoon. The first sip was cautious, as if she half expected it to burn her or taste bitter. Instead, warmth spread through her chest, making her eyes close for a heartbeat. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. Kale didn't speak, sat across from her, drinking his own stew, his gaze calm. The silence wasn't heavy now. It was different. Almost comfortable. When the bowl was empty, she placed the spoon down and leaned back slightly. The blanket slid from one shoulder, revealing the sharp lines of her collarbone. She caught Kale looking, but there was no hunger or cruelty in his eyes, only concern. It made her heart beat faster in a way. She didn't understand. Cale stood and walked to a small wooden chest by the wall. From it, he pulled a simple wooden crutch. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it will help you move without pain." Lyra stared at it. She had not expected this: food, warmth, and now something that could give her back a piece of her freedom. Slowly, she pushed herself up from the chair and reached for it. Her fingers curled around the smooth wood. It was lighter than she thought, balanced, strong. She took one step, then another. The sound of the crutch tapping against the floor echoed in the small room. It wasn't much, but it was movement without leaning on anyone, without dragging herself. When she looked up, Cale was smiling faintly. Better. She gave the smallest nod, her throat too tight to speak. The wind outside rattled the shutters, but she no longer looked toward the door with fear. The thought crept into her mind before she could stop it. Maybe she didn't have to leave tonight. The fire had burned low, leaving the room in a soft orange glow. Shadows swayed on the walls, and the smell of stew still lingered in the air. Lyra sat in the chair near the hearth, the blanket tight around her shoulders, the wooden crutch resting against her knee. For the first time in years, she wasn't listening for danger. There were no heavy boots in the street, no mocking voices, no rush of footsteps behind her. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the quiet clink of Cale washing the dishes. He moved with the steady rhythm of someone used to living alone. Yet now his movements seemed slower, as if he didn't want to disturb her. When he finished, he brought over a mug of warm tea and set it beside her. Steam curled upward, carrying the scent of mint and honey. She stared at it for a moment before wrapping her fingers around the mug. As the heat seeped into her palms, and she felt something inside her chest loosen, not completely, but enough to take a deeper breath. Cale sat in the other chair, not too close, but close enough that the space between them felt safe. He leaned back, stretching his legs toward the fire. "You can sleep here tonight," he said. "There's a spare room upstairs. It's not much, but it's warm." Her eyes flickered toward the stairs. She hadn't slept in a bed in so long. She could barely remember the feeling. Sleeping inside felt strange, dangerous even, but also tempting. "What do you want in return?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying more suspicion than curiosity. Cale looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly. "Nothing," he said. "Just rest." That answer made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't explain. No one offered something without a price, not in her world. She sipped the tea slowly, letting its warmth spread down her throat. When the fire began to fade, Cale stood. "I'll show you the room." She followed him, her crutch tapping softly on the wooden floor. The stairs creaked under her weight, each step feeling like she was crossing into territory she didn't deserve. The small room was simple, a bed with clean sheets, a folded quilt at the foot, and a small lamp casting a gentle light. She stood in the doorway, staring at it. Her fingers tightened on the crutch. It looked too clean for someone like her. Cale must have noticed her hesitation because he spoke softly. "It's yours for as long as you need it." She wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, she stepped inside, the quilt rustling as she sat on the bed. The mattress gave under her weight, and the softness nearly startled her. Cale left the door half open as he went back downstairs, giving her space but not shutting her out completely. She sat there in the quiet, the fire's warmth still clinging to her skin, the scent of tea on her lips. For the first time in years, the air around her didn't feel heavy. For the first time in years, she didn't fall asleep on cold stone. And though she didn't want to admit it, the thought crossed her mind. Maybe this was what it felt like to begin again. Asterisk. The morning light slipped through the curtains, touching the edge of the quilt. Lyra woke slowly, her body sinking into the mattress as if it had finally remembered how to rest. The air smelled faintly of bread, and something sweet. Cale was already in the kitchen. She sat up, running her fingers along the soft fabric. For a moment, she forgot the weight of her missing leg. But as soon as she swung her body to the side of the bed, reality returned, heavy as ever. She reached for her crutch and made her way downstairs. Cale looked up from the table when she entered. He had moved the chairs aside, clearing a space, in the center of the room. On the table beside him sat something wrapped in cloth, its shape unfamiliar. "Sit," he said, pulling one of the chairs closer to the fire. She frowned, but did as he asked. Her eyes stayed fixed on the covered object. Cale stepped forward and placed it gently in her lap. The weight was solid, balanced. "Open it," he said. Her hands worked slowly, peeling back the fabric until cold metal and smooth plates of pale alloy came into view. It was a leg not crude and heavy like the prosthetics she had seen before, but sleek, light, shaped to match her own. The surface carried faint lines, like the markings on her skin, as if it had been made for her alone. She stared at it, unable to breathe for a moment. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "I built it," Cale replied. "It's yours." Her first instinct was to push it back toward him. Nothing in her life had been given without a cost. But he stayed still, his eyes steady, not demanding, not rushing. "This will let you walk again," he said softly, "if you want it." Her fingers traced the edge of the alloy, feeling the way it was warm from the fire. She could imagine it moving with her, could almost hear the sound of her steps, real steps, not the uneven rhythm of crutch and foot. "Why?" she asked again, her voice almost breaking. Cale's answer was simple: "Because you deserve it." Words struck her harder than she expected. No one had told her she deserved anything. For years, she had been treated as less, as a burden, as something broken. He knelt in front of her and began adjusting the fittings. She didn't stop him this time. The moment the prosthetic clicked into place, a strange rush filled her. Fear, hope, disbelief, all tangled together. Cale held out his hand. "Try." She gripped it and stood. The floor felt different beneath her, steady, almost natural. Another. The movement was strange, yet powerful. With each step, her balance grew. Her shoulders straightened. By the time she reached the far wall, she realized something. She wasn't just walking, she was standing tall. When she turned back, Cale was watching with a quiet smile, and, for the first time in years, she felt like she was no longer half of herself. She was whole again. Lyra stood in the center of the room, the firelight flickering across her face. The new leg gleamed faintly, catching the glow with every small movement. She shifted her weight from one side to the other, testing her balance, her breath uneven. Cale stayed back, giving her space, yet ready to step forward if she needed him. She didn't. She took another step, steady this time, and then another. Her body was remembering what it had forgotten. She reached the table, turned, and walked back, toward him without leaning on the crutch. When she stopped in front of him, her chest was rising fast, but not from exhaustion, from something sharper. Something alive. "I thought I would never stand again," she said softly. "I thought my life was over." Cale's gaze didn't leave hers. It isn't. Blinked, and for a moment her eyes shone brighter than the fire. Not with tears, but with something harder to break, determination. He stepped aside and opened the front door. Cold morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant rain. She hesitated only for a heartbeat before walking outside. The sound of her footsteps firm against the wooden porch. The street was quiet. A few neighbors glanced up, their surprise plain when they saw her walking. Whispers started, but she didn't care. She kept moving, her head high. Cale followed at a distance, watching as she reached the corner and turned back toward him. Faintest smile touched her lips, not wide, not bold, but enough to tell him she understood. This was not the end of her story. It was the first chapter she had ever chosen for herself.